Welcome to East Wargaming. I'm Richard, bringing you another Heresy Thursday. This week, we're looking at the latest announcements again from Games Workshop on the Warhammer community. We've had a couple announcements over the past week. Most of it's about Legions Imperialis, but also today we've just had a new Heresy Thursday from Games Workshop about Age of Darkness, and we will get into that later on in the podcast. Starting off, let's look at what they announced for the Legions Imperialis, so the new epic format. They gave us the box set, and they've also given us some information on the Legions. And over the past week, they've gone into some more releases. Mainly, the two really exciting ones is more for the Titans here. So they've shown now they've got plastic versions of things that they used to have only from Forgeworld and resin. And those are the Direwolf Heavy Scout Titans. Now, these are variations of the plastic ones we saw in the most recent box set announcement, but they've got additional weapons mounted on them. To be honest, I think this was kind of a logical step, especially if they've got the framework in plastic. Adding on these extra portions to it wasn't too much of a stretch, and I think there's a focus at Games Workshop right now of trying to move as much as they can away from resin. Generally because it's just trickier to use. I'm sure they're seeing less and less demand for the resin side of things with the availability of plastic and the convertibility, but also I think a large part of it will also be down to the influx of the 3D printed market and the competition that's coming from there. Games Workshop, I think, here is looking at getting higher qualities from their plastics, and especially when they're bringing out a new game system like this, which is really a combination of three of their boxed game systems into one, they can really justify getting molds made for these kind of things, because these Warhound Titans are eligible for both Legions Imperialis, but also Adeptus Titanicus, which they are continuing to keep. So I'm not going to go too much into the weapons here. They all look really nice. They've done some very true sculpts, especially when you compare them to the Forgeworld ones here. The Volcano Cannon, the Neutron Laser, the Conversion Beam Dissipator. The level of detail is as you'd expect from coming in to plastic. These are always tricky things for them to make in resin because of, well, one, just straight things in resin are hard, and getting larger gun barrels was always tricky for Forgeworld. Making this in plastic, we'll see none of that droop, hopefully, and none of those seams that you'd get in the Forgeworld type of resin casts here. All in all, I'll honestly say the announcement was quite nice. Adeptus Titanicus is seeing some love. I guess this is really a focus for Legions Imperialis, and I think you'll find that a lot of people will start just running Titan Legions from the Adeptus Titanicus in Legions Imperialis, with a small contingent of the Space Marines themselves. I think the easiest port over for the current player base is to continue along the Adeptus Titanicus route. You'll see of note that the bases again are different. They have announced the bases being slimmer. So even though you don't have to move over from your Adeptus Titanicus bases, they're encouraging you to potentially buy these. Now the question is, will they release these bases standalone, or will these only come in part of the newest packs for the Titans here? A good question would be also, is this the only base they're going to supply? Because if you're playing Adeptus Titanicus and you already had quite a large legion of Titans, all on a specific type of base, having the newer ones on these bases would potentially throw out of whack coherency for some of the legions there. Something to think about. Again, I don't think it'll be a vastly big deal, but still something to bear in mind when looking at starting up Adeptus Titanicus now, if you wanted to get into that after getting into Legion Imperialis, or really instead of getting to Legions Imperialis. Now, Games Workshop also released a fun article about answering the burning questions we had. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of these questions were kind of expected and self-explanatory. Really, Legion Imperialis is a Horus Heresy theme thing, so it was always going to be the Horus Heresy factions there, and there was never going to be any 40k factions or Xenos. That really wasn't implied. I think for the boxed game systems, especially the ones they're combining, the Aeronautica Imperialis, the Adeptus Titanicus into Legions Imperialis there, it's all along the Horus Heresy theme. And we're seeing that with their further announcements, because they are saying, yes, as we're well aware, you can combine Adeptus Titanicus and Aeronautica Imperialis models. The Adeptus Titanicus ones is a simple port over to this. It's going to come into play for Aeronautica Imperialis here, how you do this, because Aeronautica Imperialis had a wide array of Xenos legions or forces in this, and especially the Astra Militarum forces were involved, which were also Imperial. But they're stating quite clearly, since Astra Militarum wasn't around during the Horus Heresy, that those models won't be eligible for Legion Imperialis. And also, the sadder part of things, it is very clear now that Aeronautica Imperialis, as we knew it in the 40k space, is being discontinued by Games Workshop in favor of the Horus Heresy version of Aeronautica Imperialis. So that really means that there's not going to be any support in terms of the models, the just generally getting access to them. The rulebook itself, the older rulebook, is just not available from Games Workshop anymore, and you're only stuck with the Horus Heresy one. Now, I'm impartial to this because I think that we were always going to move in this direction when they were combining game systems. They have to follow a common theme here. So I do get their idea, and it's one of their boxed games as well. So for the box games, there's always been a level of lack of care from Games Workshop's point of view for the longevity of these systems. They've always been fringe games, and combining 3 into 1 makes just logical sense for Games Workshop for games that are seeing less and less traction. I'll say, for one, us at Far East Wargaming and the community we have in Malaysia and Southeast Asia here, we see little to no games of Aeronautica Imperialis. There are small budding communities of Adeptus Titanicus players around for us, and I'm sure this is a slightly more popular game than Aeronautica Imperialis. Who doesn't love playing with large titans in a smaller scale when it's so hard to get the full scale ones from Forgeworld? Hard and expensive. Adeptus Titanicus was honestly the lovely middle ground for those who still wanted access to titans, and it's something we at Far East Wargaming will be getting into, especially now as we're going to be starting to see more and more of Legions Imperialis. One of the interesting parts as well, for Adeptus Titanicus, the rebasing is relatively straightforward. It's just a thinner base that they're saying we should adopt. Don't have to, but should adopt for Legions Imperialis. But when it comes to Aeronautica, the bases were very different because of the way the game worked. You had speed and height on these bases, on turnstile, clicker-esque indicators on the bases. And they came in I think it was hexagonal shape. So now they're saying that this wouldn't really fit the theme because the bases would look so different, and that you should rebase them. The one thing I've seen from the Aeronautica Imperialis bases, they were actually a really cool system because they were ball and socket, allowing you to unplug them and store them easily in foam cases there. I'm really wondering what they're going to do to cater to rebasing your Aeronautica Imperialis to be eligible or to fit in with the theme of Legions Imperialis. Games Workshop haven't done a great job in the past of rebasing things, especially when we saw the shift from 25 to 32, the mandatory shift there, or the shift from slotted bases to non-slotted bases there. The changeover was always problematic, and that was in their main game systems, not even their boxed set systems here. So I will be interested to see how we can adapt the Aeronautica Imperialis models, their bases, into Legions Imperialis, and also how they play in this game system. Just because it's including flyers in any game system, to get the most out of flyers, you have to let them fly, and on boards which don't have the perceived space to do so, when they're just not landers transporting troops, is always problematic. Even when we play Age of Darkness, the use of flyers for us that we've seen has been limited. I think just in general throughout Horus Heresy, we've seen sparse use of them. They've been quite powerful at some stages. They're quite weak now. One thing that was pointed out to us at Far East Wargaming that we actually had missed quite a lot in the way we read the rules is flyers coming in zooming aren't eligible to movement reactions, so they can't be targeted by interceptor reactions. Now, this does give them a lot more survivability in the terms of the turn they come in, they're not going to be shot off the board, but they still do have to survive shooting reactions and anything that can hit them snapshotting or with Skyfire in the opponent's turn. And with generally most of the flyers, their AV is quite low, their hull points are very low as well, and they're only eligible to their Shrouded 5+ from the reactions in the shooting phase there. Games Workshop also in this article dropped a very spicy hint about Primarchs in Legion Imperialis. Now, they're being quite coy with this, and I'm on the fence about whether I do want Primarchs in Legion Imperialis, just because the Primarchs we're getting from Forgeworld are such epic showcase models that even now, from what we've seen of the scaled down version of Marines and Solar Auxilia, that scaling down doesn't do them justice. And the one thing I really don't want to see is a poor version of a Primarch on a smaller base at a smaller scale. Because they're Primarchs. They're supposed to be the centerpieces of armies. And I know the centerpieces of something in Legion Imperialis would more likely be Titans and larger things. But these, to me, the epitome of what Legion is their Primarch. And when we play this in Age of Darkness, Primarchs dominate the field, just in their presence, in their rules, how they look. They're centerpieces here. And I don't want that downvalued if they do bring it into this Legion Imperialis here. Because I can quite easily see these being slightly smaller than the Contemptors they're looking at. And the Contemptors size here, I think, was something along the lines of hip height of a normal Space Marine or along those lines. And I just don't see any way you can get the level of detail to pay homage to a Primarch and their looks, their feel, and their presence on the board. But then again, each their own opinion on this. Please let me know what you think of Primarchs in this scale, the Legion Epic scale here, and if you'd like to see them on the board. Again, I think it'd be fun to have them. The only thing I want is them to do justice to the models, and I don't want them downscaling what they've got right now to lose all their detail. One of the other things that they've pointed out, and has been pointed out in some of the other articles as well that they've released for Legions Imperialis, is the new terrain they're bringing out. As I mentioned last week on the podcast, they've already discontinued the sale of their old Adeptus Titanicus terrain, which was the only terrain available in the scale of this. So they're releasing a whole new range of plastic scenery for Legion Imperialis here. Now, I'm a big fan of Games Workshop's scenery because I think they do a fantastic job on scenery. I also think it's one of their biggest moneymakers because it's extremely expensive of what you get. And I would not be surprised if third parties are going to start making things either in resin print yourself or resin buy or adaptations of this scale from other game systems to market towards Legions Imperialis. I think we at Far East Wargaming will be looking at this as well. Of course, we're very, very likely to get some stuff from the official Games Workshop plastic set, just because, as I said, we're big fans of it. They do fantastic work. Will it be the only thing we use in Legion Imperialis? Most likely not. We'll probably adapt some of our own. We're working now also with Scrapscapes KL to do some scenery here, and I'm sure we'll find a collaboration in some way to make a epic scale scenery with that collab. And honestly, we do look forward to that. And actually, I'm keen to see how people in the community themselves start to make the scaled down versions of this. In terms of scenery, there's always been different levels of detail that people go to. So the plastics coming out of Games Workshop, which I think is at the very high end of things. We've seen in just general play a big influx of these laser cut MDF or plywood terrains that are either painted or not painted, but just used to get a game up. We encourage just getting a game. We of course love great painted terrain, but being able to use anything or cheaper materials or cheaper equipment to get games in is something we're definitely proponents of here at Far East Wargaming here. And we're looking at part of our collaboration with Scrapscapes is to do this affordably for both, well, mainly the Age of Darkness, but in the future we'll be looking at the other game systems and how to make affordable terrain for those as well. Now, to round off this article that they released here, we've got the last little bit of information about the older Epic and are they eligible to play. Their answer is yes, but it would feel out of place. And I think that's something we really established in the last time we were discussing this last week, that the scale has differed. And I think in a casual game sense, nobody is going to complain about you bringing out your classic Epic miniatures to represent these in the latest Legions Imperialis. Yes, the bases are different, the scale is different, but we're all friendly here, and the whole point of this is to play horde armies, legions, large forces, not the 50, 60 models you usually get in an Age of Darkness game here. You're talking about 50, 60 squads in a game, potentially in this. So nobody's going to complain there, but they are making a very firm point, as Games Workshop usually does, that they don't support it themselves, but they're not going to complain. I very much doubt that Legion Imperialis is ever going to have any type of major official tournaments by Games Workshop here, that it's going to really factor in saying you're not allowed to bring epic 40k models to this tournament. But if they ever do, I think that would be one of their standard stipulations. They've started doing that with Age of Darkness and with 40k as well. In the 40k sense, basically everything that's Horus Heresy now has been moved into their archives, as you can say, Legacies units. And even for Age of Darkness 2.0, Horus Heresy 2.0, we've seen units being moved into Legacies that are no longer eligible for the official tournaments held by Games Workshop for the Horus Heresy here. So again, nothing unexpected from this announcement, but really just a clarification on their part. I think they're just trying to cover all their bases. Do I agree with it? Not so much. Was I surprised by it? Really not either. Now, they did release another article talking about what was the design philosophy behind what they were trying to achieve in Legion Imperialis. Honestly, I don't see much point in discussing it. It's kind of the same points over and over again, larger battles and things like this. The one thing I will point out is what this did reveal to us is more examples of the new terrain they're going to be bringing out. So really, that's the only revelation I really saw from this article here. We're seeing the epic scale versions of Ruins, and once again, I can't really fault Games Workshop. These look great. I honestly look forward to getting my hands on some of these terrain for Legion Imperialis. They seem fun to paint. They've put the new knights that they've announced as well, again on the new bases. That's a running theme here. Everything's been rebased for this. but there's nothing I can say bad about what I've seen from the new imagery coming out from Legion Imperialis, Games Workshop, and the Warhammer community for this system and in regards to the terrain. Everything else, have a read yourselves, guys. You can make up your own minds on whether you care about this. They do talk briefly about how they've made some of the missions in the rulebook centric around famous battles, but again, they also have to make them broad enough that we can use. For the rule systems, we've yet to hear any details on how the rules work. So honestly, if the game is going to be good or not, or if the game is going to be balanced or not, is too early to tell. We're not one of the playtesters for this. We'd love to be, but unfortunately we're not here. So, and even if we were, I don't think anybody's allowed to give you any hints about that. Allied Games Workshop, I will honestly not be surprised if when the rules come out, there are some huge holes in it and some major imbalances, because don't forget, you're trying to balance Knights, Titans with Space Marines and Solar Auxilia. How that comes into play is going to be very interesting. We see already a difficulty in that balance in Age of Darkness. I think the exasperation of those potential problems could be seen when you scale this up to larger forces as you play in this epic scale here. Well, that covers everything for the Legion Imperialis they announced. Now, the exciting part is that they have now announced a new Heresy Thursday focusing back on Age of Darkness, what we love. And the announcement today is another miniature. And this time, it's a champion with a Paragon Blade. Now, we're going to put a precursor. This is, of course, going to be resin, as is really what has been happening with a lot of their new character announcements. So it will be from Forgeworld. At a first glance, I do like the styling of what they're going here. Now, it's quite clear that it is still Imperial Fist-esque, with the crown they're wearing, especially on the bear head, but also on the helmeted head here. We're seeing real indications of Imperial Fist. And the one thing I don't like about this model is I don't like when they tie you into specific weapons. And in this case, it's a combi melter. I'll say I've never put a combi melter on a Legion champion in any of the games I've played. I think it's honestly a waste of points to put a shooting weapon on a close combat oriented character. It'll be interesting to see how easy it is to swap out, whether it's coming off at the socket for this, or you're going to have to do some crazy sculpting. It wouldn't be too hard to cut off the melter part, the combi melter part, and just put it back to a normal bolter, which is kind of a saving grace there. But I'd be very surprised if this arm is attached to the body on the resin model. I think it'll be quite a simple switch out to something plastic here to replace that left-hand shooting arm. The same goes, honestly, with the head. This is a very simple replacement opportunity to get your own Legion helmet on, or one of the other bear helmets, the bear heads, that I'm sure are sitting around in your bits box somewhere. I know personally for me, I've got lots. So this is definitely something I'd look at, especially for my Dark Angels. It's a nice alternative to the old champion we had in the past, which is a very old model. I believe that champion came in a 2-model box from Forgeworld with the Master of Signals. The Master of Signals has seen a significant downgrade in Heresy 2.0. They're still a very good character to have, but they've lost mainly their large blast, once per game large blast for an orbital strike that they used to have. But they still have a lot of benefits, and we do see them still quite a bit in the more shooting-oriented armies that we have here in Malaysia. If we look at the model a bit more in detail, we look at the 360 view of this Marine here, there's nothing really I can fault with it. there's a big sway right now for tabards to be used, and I like it. It gives you a bit of ability to flex if you want to paint, and especially now with contrast paints, they're actually very easy to paint robes. Slap chop method for painting robes is providing a lot of depth and making a very simple way to do some very sophisticated looking tabards. So I'm not opposed to having tabards here. The touch of the Oath of Moments on the sword I think is nice. These kind of bits that stick out to me look a bit fragile, especially when we're looking in resin. So I'd be actually very interested to see how fragile those parts are and whether it's integrated in or again it's something you're adding on. Even though they're nice, I do shy away in resin of bits that dangle out that can be easily knocked off and broken and then quasi impossible to stick back on. And anybody working with the Forgeworld resin, or really any resin per se, will know how hard it is when something is broken to get it to stick again to even a small modicum of the level of sturdiness that it originally had without some significant pinning. And on stuff this small, I think pinning is quasi impossible here. We're following still the Mark 6 plate, or at least a artificer version of this Mark 6 plate. I'm not a huge fan of the studded shoulder pads, but I guess the saving grace on this, as opposed to the plastics, is there is likely no seam line right down the middle of the shoulder pad to deal with. You're just going to have to deal with working in resin. And again, that's something it's quite easily overcome and is not as daunting as it used to be in the past there. All in all, this latest model I'm very pleased with. I really can't fault too much. I don't think it's going to be too hard to correct any of the smaller mistakes I see there or I disagree with here. Once again, we've got another Tactical Rock, so the Tactical Rock fans rejoice there. It's probably something I will try and cut off when I get this model here in favor of something more built by myself here. Tactical Rocks have never been my preference, and I get why they're in some of the models for plastic. I have no idea why they're included in any of the models for resin there. There's very little need to put Tactical Rocks in there. The pose is not new in any way. The 1 foot slightly up above the lower foot is been done to death, Games Workshop. There are different poses you can do. For a champion, you could have done a super energetic pose, and I think it might be a bit of a loss not to have him, especially in an action pose, striking down with the Paragon Blade or something along those lines. This is a relatively static pose for such a, well, I'd say, just actionable character, and I think you have missed the opportunity here, even though I think the model itself does look great. Well, look, that rounds up our look at the latest announcement from Games Workshop for the Horus Heresy, both Age of Darkness and Legions Imperialis. It's nice that it looks like Heresy Thursday by Warhammer Community is coming back, so we will be doing this ongoing discussion about their latest announcements every week. In the coming weeks, we'll have Jason back on the podcast to have a bit more of a two-way discussion here and not just me giving my personal opinion. Those who've listened in and tuned in, thanks for taking the time. We do appreciate it. Please let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with anything I've said here. Again, these are just my opinions on this. I'm not omnipotent. I am also not always right. I'm probably quite wrong on some of the things we've been discussing, especially with Legions Imperialis there. But please interact in the comments. We always look at them. We always reply. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It helps us here at Far East Wargaming to grow. We'll be back on Monday with another battle report. Apologies for no battle report this week. We've had a slight delay in the production of a couple of our battle reports here, but we will be resuming again on Monday for this. But from me, Richard at Far East Wargaming, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. But for now, thanks very much, and see you next time.